Ryan Fowler, man, I'm really excited to have you here. Talk about your story, these intangibles that make us who we are, those things that you really don't see it, but when you look at a history of someone, you can start to handpick and pull out these different intangibles. And so, really excited to dive into, your story, who you are, and what made you who you are.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Ron, I know you're a Florida guy. You grew up in a place where it's just like speed kills. Florida is known for its speed. Were you a speed guy or were you just a headbanger?
So from about as far back as I can remember, my dad always told me that I was slow. Always told me I was slow, and I believe that. I don't know that I was slow, but he just wanted me to have certain expectations, and so it was very clear from probably the time I was 4 on that all I ever wanted to do was play football. And he was very big on academics and making sure that we got good grades, my sister and I. And he wanted us to do well in sports, but he always wanted to make sure we had realistic expectations about sports. So he said a lot of things to me, growing up. You're never going to be big enough. You're never going to be fast enough. You're too white, et cetera, et cetera. And as you said, Florida is all about speed. And so I grew up thinking I was pretty slow, and I constantly worked on it. I always wanted to get faster. Back when I think I was in middle school, they came out with these shoes, these strength shoes. Do you remember these strength shoes?
I remember those with the platform on the front.
Platform in the front. Yeah. I mean, these were the most ridiculous things. But essentially, for those of you who don't know, they were regular shoes, but in the front there was this big platform that essentially what it did is it was the opposite of a high heel, right?
Yeah.
It was a high toe.
Right.
And what it did was it lifted your heel off the ground so that you had to use your calf muscles and your Achilles and that sort of structure to move around. And these things probably weighed like 3 pounds, 4 pounds each.
Heavy.
Right. They were heavy. So they really weren't like very conducive to the type of training that the program came with. But I did anything like that to get faster, stronger, always thinking that I had to catch up to everybody else because my dad had put it in my head that, listen, you're a smart kid, but you're never going to be a football player.
I'm jealous, man, because I remember when those shoes came out, and around the time when they came out, I was wearing a size 16 shoe.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so I was trying to figure out how can I get these? And then I started trying to figure out, can I make them myself? Can I take an old pair of shoes and make them? But it failed pretty quickly.
Well, that's cool. So like, I should say, much like the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out generic version, which is just called Punch-Out.
Punch-Out. Yeah.
I had that. I didn't have the strength shoes.
Yeah.
Somebody had made a knockoff version of these shoes, and they were horrible. I mean, they were made of cardboard essentially, and I couldn't keep them on really. I had to tie them double tight. I would tape them on because it would slip off the back. But my friends would be going to the movies or to like hang out with each other, and I would be out in the front yard running with these things, doing the drills that were on here. And my dad said, he had a good point. He said, like, wouldn't you get faster just by doing those drills without those shoes? And I was like, I don't know, but these shoes, this is where it's at.
This is it.
And that's been a theme all the way through my whole life. I have always tried to find the best thing to get better, right? Yeah. Whether that was those shoes or this rubber band or this program. There was Carl Lewis put out I forget what it was called, Fast Speed something, this videotape, VHS that I would watch over and over. And so to answer your question, in such a long-winded way, I was not fast, not Florida fast for sure. Not
Florida fast, all right.
But I was strong, and so that was really my advantage over everybody else. Was I was stronger, and probably more than that was I was willing to work harder. Yeah. Like I said, from a young age, while other kids were doing fun things, I already had it in my mind that I wanted to play in the NFL, that it was going to be a long shot, so I had to do everything I could possibly do. I bench pressed 420 pounds in high school because that was something I could control. I would lift all the time. I was constantly.
What was your squat, though?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that.
Yeah. Well, so I had the opposite.
You were a big squatter.
I was a 700 something. I was like a 725 pound squatter.
Oh my gosh.
As a junior in high school. But my bench was like 325.
Okay. So I probably bench pressed more than I squatted.
Yeah.
And that probably didn't help with the speed either, but I didn't know any better. Like our workouts came from muscle magazines.
Yeah.
I didn't know about like proper speed training. I didn't understand the importance of lower body strength. Of course, we didn't have a weight room either in my high school, not until I was probably a senior, I guess. So we did have some like rusted weights, but we had a bench. That was it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I got good at. I got good at bench pressing.
We had all of the top line stuff at my high school, Madison Central High School, but we didn't have our strength program wasn't about core and, mobility. It was just like, let's throw on the weight. I remember the first time I started squatting, they just threw on four or five and it's like, let's see if you can do it. And I was like, okay, that was easy. All right, we'll throw on, 480. And so it just kept just throwing weight on versus like a progression of a program that you're supposed to follow.
It's funny. I think about that all the time. And I think that really like a lot of programs, a lot of people are starting to overcomplicate that. There's so much emphasis on like, is this new? Is this cutting edge? Yeah. But, I look back and like you said, you squatted 700 pounds in high school. You were doing something right. Like, and I see these kids now, I
was farm strength.
I get it. I get it. Like there are definitely freaks. I mean, I played with a guy named Larry Allen who,
oh man, LA.
Yeah.
Dude.
We can get into a story about him later, but yeah, he took years off my life. But, I never saw him do anything fancy. He just put on a ton of weight and did it.
Just move it.
And if you ever watch that, there's a video on YouTube of him bench pressing 700 pounds.
Yeah.
And I'm so amazed every time I go back to that video because there's no technique.
Right.
Like he's not positioning his feet or arching his back or like he has a pretty narrow grip. He doesn't have any sort of control on the way down. He just goes down and up. Yeah. Yeah. He was a monster though. He was a rhinoceros.
Again, that's genetics too.
100%.
Yeah. 100%. So we got to take that in
genetics,
consideration.
But you don't get that strong without working at it.
No, yeah, absolutely. You got to work at it, but you still have some genetics behind you.
For sure. Yeah. If your father is a rhinoceros and your mother is a lion, yeah, for sure.
Oh man, so you growing up, you're trying to get faster. You have in your head, sounds like at an early age that you want to play in the NFL. Why the NFL? I mean, why was that a thing for you? I mean, when you have the beach, you have pretty girls, you have you have everything right at your fingertips.
Yeah, no, I was really singularly focused. Well, I should say there was two focuses I had. It was school and football, and the reason that school is such a focus is because my dad wouldn't let me play football if I didn't have good grades.
Yeah.
So I started playing tackle football at 8 in third grade, but from 4 to 8, I was out there on the fields watching other guys play. So I think what it was for me was, I sort of idolized my father. In the way that a lot of boys do. To me, he was a superhero, right? He was big and he was strong. Now, in retrospect, not very big, not very strong. Okay, but when I was growing up, he was big and strong, and I think he probably imparted certain values into me that whether he knew it or not. I mean, unconsciously, he made me want to be masculine.
Yeah.
And to me, once I found football, like I said, I was about 4 years old and we were walking around on the sports fields where I grew up and I saw football practice. And my dad would talk about football players and he would talk about his high school football experience. And I got the message pretty early on that like the manliest thing that you could do is be tough and be strong and play football. And so once I got that idea in my head, that's all I wanted to do. Now, like I said, I had to balance that with academics. When I was in 5th grade, so my family, my sister and I, we were straight A's. And in 5th grade, I got 3 A's and 3 B's on a report card during the football season. And my dad kicked me off the team.
Oh,
he pulled me off the team.
Snatch you out.
Right. And I was crushed. Now I will say I was very, industrious. So I went to resourceful. I went to my teachers and I said, my dad just kicked me off the team. I need some kind of extra credit. Can you please help me out? And they were wonderful and they gave me extra credit. And so I brought those grades up. And then, so I was off for a week, but the message was very clear right away. Like, if you don't do what you need to do, you're not going to get to do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But
that doesn't always carry over because, I know kids who parents will say, hey, if you don't make the grades, hey, you're not going to play sports. Man, I'm like that with my kids. My son can't come in here with a C. Mm-hmm. And he's not playing. And so, but at the same time, that motivation, what does that motivation come from to say, oh, this is really what I want to do? I mean, I think about your dad telling you being slow, do you think that was his way of really trying to motivate you? Do you think that, he saw something in you early in life that said, hey, if I talk to Ryan this way, he can accomplish these type of goals?
I would love to say that was his motivation. I really think it was more about managing expectations. I really do. my dad, 6'2", he's always weighed, as long as I've been alive, he's weighed 185 pounds. He's a beanpole. So he probably, and he's slow, right? So he probably saw like, listen, I don't want you to get your hopes up thinking that you're going to go do something that 1 out of a million kids get to do. Right. Why don't we focus on something that's likely to happen? Like as a family, we're all fairly intelligent. Both my parents were electrical engineers, like pretty smart people. You have a good chance if you work hard to have a pretty good life. Yeah. But no matter how hard you work, the chances of you playing football in the NFL, I mean, there's luck involved, there's chance, there's all kinds of things involved. So no, I think he was more managing expectations than he was trying to motivate me. His motivation was pretty straightforward. Yeah. It was like, you can do this, you can't do this. Now, whether or not that his intended effect is actually what happened, that's up for debate. I do think that I was motivated by him saying I couldn't. But it was never even like, there was never naysayers, right? Never bothered me ever. I don't know. It just wasn't in my conscious like awareness.
Right.
Yeah. The one thing that my dad instilled in me, well, a lot of things, but the one thing that probably carried over and really helped me succeed in whatever I needed to do was work ethic. Right. My dad was very big on if you're in a room with somebody who's working, you're not sitting, right? Like it became almost a bit of it became a problem for me later on in life that I couldn't sit still because in some ways I was being lazy, right? To the point where I became manic, driven to activity all the time. But early on that was really useful because most kids are like lazy. I mean, we're all in. I mean, this is around the time that Nintendo's coming out and Sega and all this stuff.
You say Nintendo.
Yeah, I got Nintendo for Christmas. Like I was, I don't know, 6 years old or something, and he wouldn't let me play it. Like not for any stretch of time. I'd have to go to my friend's house where they were playing it. So it was instilled in me pretty early on. Like we don't sit and do nothing.
I think you got to explain what a Nintendo is to the younger generation that don't know what those are.
So for those young kids that are listening, if you can imagine your PlayStation or your Xbox or one of those gaming systems that is in 2 dimensions, all right, almost black and white, and is so boring to watch that you'd be surprised. It's almost like a flip book. They probably don't know what a flip book is. So a flip book is we used to draw these pictures on pages of a book and flip the book to make it look like a movie. The graphics on Nintendo, the original NES, Nintendo Entertainment System at the time, were rudimentary, elementary. They were very basic, but that's all we had. That's all we had at the time. But I'll tell you what, thank God that's all we had.
Yes.
Because the entertainment available to kids now is such competition for real world activity that like I'm not so sure that I wouldn't have been hooked on games if we had that available back then. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was a big Nintendo guy. Super Mario Brothers was my go-to. But you said something, earlier where you talked about you want to do something that was real masculine, and we're in this conversation around, masculinity right now. What does that mean to you? Like, and do you think what it means to you now meant the same to you back then?
No, 100%. It's been an evolution of that idea, especially since I've had children, especially in my adulthood. Now, it remained fairly constant from the time that I became aware of what that was, age 4 or 5, something like that, until I was done playing, pretty much. Now, I did have kids while I was playing, so things started to shift a little bit during that time. But even when I said outwardly, oh, masculinity isn't about being tough, it's about taking care of people, like I didn't really believe it at the time because everything in me was so geared up to be a football player, to be like strong and tough and all that I really thought that if I let any of that softness creep in, that was going to jeopardize my ability to do that. Yeah. So no, it's totally different today, especially now, I'm in my 40s now, and the definition, and I'm still struggling with this. Like I'm still trying to decondition what I believed early in life to be masculinity. Yeah. So for me, a masculinity in my early life meant big, strong, tough, Don't cry. Don't talk about feelings. If you are going to talk about feelings, talk about them matter-of-factly. Take care of those around you, dutiful, definitely take care of your duties, your responsibilities, those kinds of things. But everything was very much about like stoicism, right? It was do your job, do it the best you can. Don't complain, don't whine. And that was both an advantage and eventually became an Achilles heel for me because I wouldn't ask for help.
Yeah.
And later in life, that led me to some problems because we all really need help. So, now my ever evolving idea of masculinity, where it stands right now, is something much softer, and it's not softer in a bad way.
Yeah,
it's softer in a flexible way.
And vulnerabilities.
Vulnerability is so important because, what is it? No man is an island unto himself. We are social creatures. We do need each other. In isolation, we all perish.
Yeah.
But again, the values that were instilled in me very early on was self-sufficiency, being able to do things without the help of others. And really, everybody's heard the phrase like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case in my house. Yeah. In my house, it was keep your mouth shut. Like, you don't
be seen, not heard.
Yeah. And don't complain. And I was a talker. So like I was getting told all the time, like, shut up. So especially after I was done playing football and I started coaching. And then early on, I started out college football. I was coaching, and so there wasn't a whole lot of growth there. When I started coaching high school kids, little league kids, my daughter actually played tackle football for the Blaze for 4 years, and it didn't work. The way I was brought up and my idea of masculinity and being tough and of being virtuous was different. The world was changing. And one thing that I've come to learn very, very acutely over the last probably 10 or 15 years is nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. Mm-hmm. And for coaching, that's like there's probably no area of life that and parenting, there's probably no area of life that's like where that's more relevant. Is once a kid knows that you care, man, he's all ears. He'll do anything for you. Yeah. But that's not the way I was coached growing up. My coaches were all F words and, and water makes you weak and pain is French bread and all that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's really good for everybody. It's good for the world that the idea of masculinity is changing. I will say this. Some people have gone too far. And look, to each his own, right? To each his own. But there's nothing, there shouldn't be anything soft or weak about masculinity. Right. Flexible, I think, the story of the oak versus the bamboo, right? Yeah. Like a bamboo can withstand winds, hurricane winds because it's flexible, whereas an oak might snap.
Right.
I like that idea of masculinity, that masculinity isn't weak, but it's flexible.
Well, with that same theory, that's what I've carried those same principles growing up. Early on in my life, same thing, dutiful, taking care of people around you, being strong, not showing any kind of vulnerabilities or, be seen, not heard. Mm-hmm. But over time, and this is something that I'm constantly thinking about now, is this new age masculinity. It's from a, early age, you've been taught this is how you do it. And then you start to mix in that flexibility, which still makes you strong and sturdy because you can still stand your ground and have your values around what it means to be a guardian and take care of people, to do your job, do it well, but then also to lean into those vulnerabilities and being able to admit when you're wrong, being able to have empathy and sympathy for others, as well as for yourself, knowing that, everything wasn't peaches and cream for me growing up, and also being able to recognize a lot of those things shape me who I am today, and then finding that flexibility in those things to show up differently for my kids and the people that I'm around. So when you said that, it just brought up all that for me to really touch on, because it's something that I think we as men, continue to start to, to hear that, because we are being told not to be masculine anymore. And I think the conversation needs to be had of, like you said, is the flexibility and having the ability to really to understand people and without judgment, and then have further conversations in a way that's healthy.
Yeah. Well, the last thing you said right there, I think, is the key. It's conversations. And, so one of the things that I've found maybe the most important character trait that a man can have, and maybe anybody, is the ability to communicate. And communication is two parts, right? It's listening, and then it's also talking. But it's not just talking; it's expressing. And like I said about isolation before, isolation will kill us. And not talking about your feelings, not talking about the problems you have or your challenges, is actually a bigger hindrance than any kind of softness, right? So the masculinity now that we're looking for has a lot to do with your communication abilities. If I can express my problems, my concerns, clearly to somebody else, then I stand a real chance of getting help.
Right.
So yeah, it's not like, a lot of people talk to me, like, say, wow, you're such a good talker. Like, you use such big words. That's not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm talking about is the ability to like you said, clearly express an idea, a concern, a need, so that it gets met, so that it gets understood, so that it gets internalized. So I think now, if I were to add a couple of things to the masculine framework, that's different from when I was growing up, or at least different from the way that I was taught, it has a lot to do with expressing, listening, and introspection, right? Like a lot of things that, part of being mentally tough used to mean you don't even give space to the problems that come up in your head, right? You push them away.
Right.
Well, that's not going to help, right? What's going to help is, once I can identify these problems,
how do I work through it?
And then how do I work through it? Yeah. So I think one of the best qualities that I'm finding now with young kids, especially, is this ability to know what's going on in their own bodies, and introspection. And a lot of that comes from encouraging them to do such things, right? And then the ability to express it back. Like, it's so difficult to help somebody who can't tell you what they need. Right. And so a really important skill these days, probably always has been, but it's showing up more now all the time, is the ability to express what you need.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. Yeah.
Well, I digress a little bit, but I think that was a really important conversation to have. And so thank you for taking us down your thought process around it.
Absolutely.
It's always good for me to hear other sides, to learn and see how, I can continue to grow. And so back to it. So you're doing the work, you're putting the work in to become a, this All-American football player. When did you get to a place where you were like, okay, I feel like I've made it to a place where I feel like I can get highly recruited or recruited by someone to go play, so I can continue to live out my dream?
Not until it happened. Really, because I did believe what my dad said was that it's probably not going to happen. It never changed my dedication or commitment to trying to make it happen. But for me, I was happy enough to chase the dream. I didn't realize I would ever reach it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, it's not like today, like you didn't get recruited as an 8th grader or 9th grader, right? Like, you had to wait.
Just still nuts to me.
It's so crazy. Yeah. But that's the world. So yeah, it was probably, I guess it was the end of my junior year, I started getting letters, and I didn't know what they meant. Like, we didn't have the kind of information, like the availability of all the information that the kids have now. And probably to their detriment to an extent, and probably to our advantage, because the focus remained pretty narrow.
Right.
I wasn't always worried about, like, am I getting recruited? I was just like, get stronger, get faster, learn football better. Right. Yeah. So, it was about the end of my junior season that I started getting I heard a guy on TV say something nice about me. And that was when I first realized, oh, maybe I'm good. Maybe I'm good at football. Up to that point, I really just didn't even consider it. Yeah. I just kept going. So, I was not highly recruited. I was getting interest by the Ivy Leagues, the academies, because I had good grades.
Yeah.
And I was sufficient as a football player. But then probably, I guess it was my senior year. It was probably during the season, my senior year, that I started to get a couple of offers. The first one was USF, South Florida, which at the time was not in Division I. It was like 1AA. UCF, who wasn't in a conference at the time, and then Duke. And those were really my 3 offers that I had outside of the academies in the Ivy Leagues. So I took a trip. Now, I didn't know anything about Duke. I watched them play against Florida State on TV and get killed, and that's really all I knew about them. And I wasn't a basketball fan, so I really wasn't aware of them at all. I thought their name was kind of cool, and so I got offered to go for a visit, and my parents and I went to visit. And funny story, so my parents were keenly aware of the academic situation at Duke, and so they really wanted me to go. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So they really wanted me to go there. It was that. It was West Point. Now, the problem with that was the service, right? Like the obligatory 5 years of service after you're done.
At West Point.
Right.
Yeah.
At any of the academies. And I was like,
damn.
Not only was I kind of like that, my parents were like, So really it came down to like Ivy Leagues that only offered financial aid and not full scholarships, or Duke, who was on par with some of the Ivy Leagues in terms of academics, and in the ACC, right? So I went out on a visit, and it was Friday night. I went out with all the guys, and they make sure you have a good time. And so Saturday comes around, and I'm not ready for this tour, right? It's me, my mom, and a group of other players and their parents. And
you wasn't ready for the tour. Why wasn't you ready for the tour?
So So I wanted to be one of the guys.
Yeah, okay. Let's recruiting stories now. Here we go. Let's go.
So it wasn't a great look. Duke at the time, especially, wasn't exactly a party place. It was centered right in the middle of Durham, North Carolina. At the time, Durham, North Carolina was heavily racially divided. It was the murder capital of North Carolina. It was not a nice place.
Yeah.
The campus itself was beautiful, the Gothic architecture and all of that, but outside of it, there wasn't a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
So Duke wasn't exactly a party school, but it was a drink. I mean, everybody was drinking all of the time, right? So my visit was interesting. We went out and we got drunk, and
not Jose.
Oh man. I mean, it was shots of tequila and beers over and over and over. And like I said, I wasn't really a big drinker in high school. So I didn't handle it well. So the next day I woke up and it was just, I didn't have any interest in going on this tour. And it was hot. It was hot. So we get, I don't know, we're probably like halfway through the tour, I would assume. And I just wanted to go. I just wanted to leave. But I wouldn't say that, right? Like, cause my dad was there and he would. So we're getting a tour of the chapel. Now we're out in front of the chapel, which is like the famous Duke chapel. It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's like oohing and awing over the chapel, and I couldn't care less. I really couldn't give a shit. And so, but I was miserable and I was hungover, and so I remember I'm looking up like this, and I'm like, oh man, I just want to go home. And as I'm looking up like this, I feel a splat right on my forehead. And I went, oh. And I thought, could this day get any worse? And a bird had shit right on my head. and I'm like, I look at my mom like this, and she looks at me, and my mother's from Iran, okay, and is very superstitious. And either she's very superstitious or I fell for it, okay? Because
it's a sign.
It's a sign. Everything is a sign with my mother, okay? So she goes, oh, Omid, my middle name's Omid, means hope in Farsi. She goes, oh, Omid, do you know what this means? I go, yeah, it means a bird just shit on my head. And she's like, no, Omid. She goes, this is a sign. You have to come here. And I go, okay. And she goes, Ronnie, look. And he goes, oh, shit. I go, yeah, exactly. And she goes, no, you guys don't understand. Like, this is a very important sign in Iran. Like, if a bird shits on you, it means that whatever you're doing right now, that's where you're supposed to be. Okay. And I said, okay, all right. And she goes, I'm serious. I didn't want to fight with her. So I said, okay, can we go? And she goes, are you going to come here? And I go, if I say I'm going to come here, can we go? And she goes, yeah. So I said, all right, I'm coming here. And that's how I ended up at Duke.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
True story.
That's awesome. Now knowing me, do you think I could have gotten into Duke?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would it surprise you for me to tell you that I was a Prop 48?
No,
going into college.
It wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, but you absolutely could have.
I was a Prop 48, and The reason why, because I was awful test taker.
Oh yeah.
Awful test taker. Every time I took the ACT, man, I could not just get the score that I needed to get in. I had grades for school.
Yeah.
But my ACT score is just terrible test taker. My dyslexia kicks in and I was just like anxiety come up, and now especially anything under time, I just panic and freak out. And so I wouldn't have been able to get into Duke.
You know, that's a shame because I see that a lot. You know, I see a lot of guys that like the standard tests, right? The traditional ways of assessing someone's ability or their intelligence or whatever. Look, they work for a lot of people, right? And they're sort of a good general idea of what someone's capable of. But I played with guys at Duke that scored 1,500 on their SAT, right? Which is probably like 35 on an ACT or something like that. And were dumb as rocks and had no ability to like learn the place, like the playbook or the system or whatever, but were really good at taking tests. But I also played with a lot of guys who didn't do well in scores and were the smartest guys I ever played with. So yeah, that is a shame. That is a shame. But no, if you had gotten in, you would have had no problem being there because, like I said, I played with some guys that were pretty stupid. Pretty stupid.
Well, I mean, school was always challenging for me, but I put the work in. I had work ethic, so I would have been fine because I would have put the work in. All right, so now you're on campus. You're at Duke, and you know, do you take a step back and look at your dad and say, you know, he's been managing your expectations for a long time. Do you have anything smart to say to him, you know, once you kind of get there?
Nope, didn't have anything smart to say, but that was a turning point for me. That was when I started to realize, wait, maybe I can do more than I thought I could do. And actually being at Duke, when I was there, so Duke in 2000 and 2001, ESPN put out a show once called The 25 Worst Teams of All Time.
Oh, man.
Okay. We were on there twice, 2000 and 2001. We won 0 games in 2 years. Okay. So we're 0-23. Those are my first 2 years. But as a result of being on a fairly bad team, I got to play right away.
Right.
So I led my team in tackles my first year. And that's playing, I think, 7 out of 12 games.
Wow.
Yeah. So what that did for me was like really important. That gave me a lot of confidence that I could make it to the next level. And, you know, I'm not proud of this, but right as that's happening, I'm starting to realize, you know what, if I put everything I've got into football, maybe I can slack off a little bit on the academic side. And, cause my idea was I was going to be a doctor. So I was pre-med and football first year, especially. It's tough, man. It was just really tough. And my grades were struggling as a result. So I made the decision after my freshman year that I'm not going to do the pre-med track. So I started asking guys and I said, well, like, hey, what's the easiest major, you know? And it was pretty unanimous. Well, there was 2 of them. It was history and sociology. History sounded terribly boring to me. I love history now, but at the time it sounded miserable. So I went with sociology. And it turns out I love it. I love sociology, but I chose it as a major because it would give me a chance to spend more time on football.
Yeah.
And man, that's when I found film study. Like that's when I found, you know, my freshman year was just run around as fast as I can, hit things and hope that everything works out for the best. And I was kind of a tackling machine. But my second year, I spent so much time trying to figure out film study. Turns out like nobody has a system for this, right? Like we can talk about that later, but like I had to develop a system later in life to be able to teach kids in sort of a predictable way how to film study. But for me, it was literally just hours of staring at film and trying to pick out things. And I remember it being so exciting to me when I would find a tendency or a tell or like a tip off or anything like that. And I would run upstairs to the coach's offices and be like, look what I found. And they would, you know, they were probably like, hey, we're not going to discourage this, but we've seen it. Yeah, we saw that already. But man, that's when I really fell in love with the mental side of football and started to realize there was more important things. I should say there were things just as important as the physical aspects. And you know, at about that age is when guys are starting to kind of max out, right? Physically anyway. Right. And there was such a discrepancy, especially back then in football awareness and football IQ and the physical abilities.
Right.
And the problem is I'm still finding that, right? Like I'm still finding parents, coaches, especially parents, right? Like parents are spending so much money and time to get their kids physically trained, and neglecting the mental side of it.
Right.
And because of that, there's a really big opportunity for kids that are looking into the mental side of it, right? Into football IQ, into the social compatibility of team, like, teamwork and things like that. And even further than that, right? Like, there's football IQ in terms of what's your knowledge of the game.
Two different things.
Right. And then there's like the understanding of how to be a whole player.
Right.
And so much of that has to do with like psychological things, right? These are things like we talked about before: communication and mental toughness, resilience, like your ability to endure stress. Like that's probably the biggest thing,
right.
Especially at certain positions, right? Like a quarterback who gets riled up every time something bad happens isn't going to last long, regardless of his physical attributes. So that became really interesting. Like that, the fact that I was studying sociology and this new sort of interest or this new awareness of the importance of the mental side of football, like, tied together really well. And all of a sudden, like, I became a leader, and I became more aware of things that could help me beyond the physical attributes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're hitting on a lot of great points, and that's a lot of the focus that we do within Team Q, the company that I have, is being able to look at these different measures to help you become more aware of who you are.
Right.
And so when you said stress, a lot of people think stress is bad. Like, not all stress is bad, not all stress is good.
Right.
And so it's about that balance of what's your threshold and how close are you to that threshold.
Right.
And so we have this measure that can look at how close you are to that threshold. And when you start to make a transition, the goal is to help you get that threshold, to get it down away from your threshold, so that you can absorb more information, which I think is a really important piece of helping young kids and young athletes understand this, because if you're already at that top threshold, you're already bumping up against it, then it makes it really challenging when you're going into a university that's going to throw a huge playbook at you to absorb new information. Yep. And then you're talking about not just football, but school. On top of all of that. Yep. And so that being said, how, when you start to really manage, you start to really understand, and I'm getting out of pre-med, I'm going into sociology, but man, I got more time to study film. How did you balance that and not, and how did you still create excitement for school, knowing that you have to have the grades to stay eligible to play? Yeah. Or it's one, now it's a thing for the NCAA, but two, your parents is going to be on your head if you're not making the right grades.
Well, that you just said it. I mean, it was the fear that my parents would be disappointed or that I wouldn't be eligible to play football. Now, I was almost never in any danger of being academically ineligible, but I was in fear of disappointing my parents, right? Yeah. But no, honestly, the reason that I stayed interested in the academic part was because I was learning something I really enjoyed, and it was sociology. And so sociology and psychology have a lot of crossover, right? So I think of psychology as being sort of on the basis of the individual, and sociology being on the basis of groups of people. Right. And as I became a captain of Duke in my junior year, and I was both junior and senior year captain. And so the understanding of organizations and of social networks and of people became pretty important to that role. And as a result, like, I think my understanding of how all of that worked together was very important in my own personal achievement, my own personal growth and development as a player. A lot of guys know what to do in their role, but don't really understand what's going on around them. And because of that, they don't have a complete understanding of their own role. It's hard to understand, it's really hard to understand anything completely when it's not in context.
Right. Yes.
And the context
matter.
And so what's going on around you is really important. And not only that, but like, the social dynamics, how I communicate with coaches and what's important to them, and how I communicate with players and what's important to them, was really important in building a culture that was more successful. And we did become more successful. So, I think that there's so much in terms of the soft skill that goes untapped in football, and not just football. And a lot of businesses, corporations are starting to become aware of this and are starting to take certain measures, but there's still a lot of untapped ability and potential out there that as we get a little bit better in terms of our understanding of psychology and sociology and how that all works together, office politics, things like that, organizations will start to run more efficiently, better. I think people will start to have better quality of life too.
Happier.
Yeah. I mean, I think a happier
self-awareness of self, it ultimately gets you to a place where you can be happy within your situation.
Right. There's no such thing as self-realization without self-awareness.
Yes.
And, so all of these things are really important. You know, like I said, the evolution, I think, of not just football, but of sports and in business and life. It goes from sort of a physical awareness, right, to then a knowledge, like increased knowledge, information, right, to now where we're getting in terms of like where society is headed and where, because of technology and because of just the evolution of human beings in general, is now, again, a softer skill, right? A softer awareness, but understanding who we are as people and how important that is to what we do. Yeah.
It's not soft.
It's not soft.
But it is a skill that we have to have to thrive, especially in this environment where technology, you know, all these things are, you know, it's the wild, wild west around us right now. And so,
can you imagine growing up right now and like all of this, you know, we talked about stress and stress tolerance, and like you hit on something really important. The ability to know when you're up against your threshold and to bring it back down. That's really important, right? I think another side of that is increasing the threshold, right? So if you can do those two things and you can manage those two things over time, like, wow, can you imagine? I always think of Jaden Daniels, like Jaden Daniels, right, is maybe the coolest, calmest, most collected player I've ever seen on a football field in his rookie season. And part of the reason is because he's trained that. Huh?
He's doing it in both ways. He's figured out how to get his stress tolerance down. But he's also training his threshold.
The threshold is up.
When you're doing VR and using the VR to really see the field, to slow things down. So you're doing both. Yeah. And now you create this space where when you step on the field, there's nothing that's going to freak you out. And then you can just really, it's easier for you then to go back into the Jordan days where they say, I was in the zone. It's easier for you to get in that zone.
Absolutely.
Because you've created space for it.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Being in the zone. So there's a book by, I can never say the guy's name, but there's a guy who wrote a book called, what is it called? Now I can't. Flow. It's called Flow.
Oh yeah.
This guy's got the craziest name I've ever heard. I think he's like Norwegian or something, or maybe Eastern European, but this guy is the expert on flow state, right? And yeah, flow state really is a balancing act. It's reaching a certain level of stress that's slightly below your threshold, right? But it's that place where you're pushing, you're reaching, but you're not quite overdoing it.
Right.
Well, how important is awareness to that, right? Like if you just accidentally get in flow state, you can lose it just as quickly, right? But if you know, like if you have enough self-awareness to know how to manage that just right so that you can stay in a flow state, I think Jaden Daniels is one of the first guys I've seen that's actively doing that on a daily basis.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think it's time for us to go into a 2-minute.
Okay.
We have a 2-minute segment where we get into just some easy toss-ups for you, just kind of like 2 minutes going into halftime.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit you with the first one. Best teammate you ever had?
Terrell Owens.
Terrell Owens. Okay. Wow, man. I said it's a 2 minute, but now I want to know.
Now you want to know, right? So everyone knows his public persona, right?
Yeah.
Totally different when the cameras are off, like totally different. And I say he was because when I was, in my second year and really a nobody in Dallas, he came to Dallas and he was the superstar, right? And I got injured. I think I pulled my groin or something like that. And when you're injured, when you were injured on a Bill Parcells team, nobody talks to you.
Yeah, I had Mike Holmgren, so
So he would purposely ostracize you and isolate you from the team, right? You'd have to wear a different color jersey. You'd have to stay on a bike during practice. Don't come into the absolutely just trying to tear you down.
Mental games,
he kept all of the training rooms at like 55 degrees to make it really uncomfortable. There was no padding on the table. So and a lot of people internalized that philosophy. So when someone was hurt, they really were not part of the team. And when I was hurt, T.O. kept coming out of his way all the time to check on me, see how I was doing. I mean, I couldn't believe he even knew my name at the time, right? Like I was nobody. And he was everybody. And so that's why I say he was one of the best teammates. I may be overlooking somebody, but he really was. He cared a lot about the guys that he was around. Not to mention, he was the hardest worker. Him and Kyle Van den Bosch are the two hardest workers I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I like that. Toughest running back you've ever had to tackle?
Marshawn Lynch. Well, let me take that back. There's two. Marshawn Lynch was, in general, the hardest to tackle.
Yeah.
But the hardest to stop in his tracks was Mike Alstott. No question.
Yeah,
I mean, I played Mike Alstott. It was Thanksgiving. I was with the Cowboys. And he was probably about 270 at that point, and his shoulder pads probably weighed 25 pounds. And he did such a good job of leaning forward when he ran. He would get so far behind his shoulder pads, you couldn't get to his midsection.
Right.
And you sure as hell didn't want to wrap his legs up because they were like tree trunks. The only time I've ever gotten run over in the NFL was him. But Marshawn Lynch was just nonstop, man. You get a hold of him and his legs kept pumping. And the beautiful thing, I loved playing against him because he was grunting all the time.
Yeah.
Always grunting.
Well, I can attest to it because I was blocking for him on that Beastquake run.
Yeah.
And watching him just throw people off him and just keep going. And I mean, that guy, when we first drafted him, traded for him out of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And I think the first game was we were playing Chicago, and he just would not go down.
Won't go down.
And I'm like, he's standing up and dragging people, and guys are coming trying to take his head off. And I'm like, hey, Marshawn, hey, man, at some point, just
go down.
Just go down at some point. No, he's like, they're going to have to tear my face off.
He didn't have it in him.
He didn't have it in him, man. Love block for a guy like that.
Over and over.
Yeah, and we just take it and just give it.
Absolutely.
All right, favorite stadium you ever played in?
Favorite stadium?
Yes.
Okay, so Seattle to me is so like it's so unappreciated in the realm of NFL football. Yeah. So every time I played in Seattle, I thought, how is this possible that the air that was around my head and ears was moving in and out, that I could feel it. It was like a physical thing. Like it was the loudest stadium I ever played in. Now I will say I never played in Minnesota, and I heard Minnesota is very loud, but Seattle was nuts, man. And the environment there, it was crazy. There was always one guy that was in the end zone, and there was this big pad, and he would lean over this pad and slap the pad all game.
Big low.
Unreal. Yeah.
Oh man. All right. One of the if you had a play to do over, what play would that be?
Me personally.
Yeah.
Okay. Man. Okay. Well, there's two. One is the Alstott play that I just talked about. It was DeMarcus Ware's fault. I'm just going to call him out. He jumped out of his gap. I had to jump in his gap. I was off balance. It was at the goal line. And the reason I would change it.
That's called an excuse right now. You make
no,
an excuse.
It's not an excuse. Let me give I'm just giving an explanation. Look, regardless, I don't know if I could have stopped him, but I was off balance when I'm jumping back in, and I had a cast on my hand. Yeah, I got lots of excuses. But the reason I would do that one over is because in my hometown paper, because I grew up in Florida and near Tampa, in my hometown paper, there's a picture of me on one knee, face in his crotch, bent over backwards like this as he's stepping into the end zone. That's why I would redo that one. The other one would be last regular season game I ever played in. And I had Larry Johnson. So I was playing against Cincinnati. I was with the Jets at the time. And I had Larry Johnson in the backfield. And it was zero. I don't know. It was like negative 25 with the wind chill. I couldn't feel anything. And I didn't wrap all the way up. I didn't grab. And I would have had him stopped in the backfield for a loss. Instead, he broke the tackle. He ran probably, 40 yards. That was by far the biggest gain. In fact, I think that doubled their offensive output for the whole game combined. But it was just embarrassing.
Yeah. Hey, when you play in the league as long as we have, you're going to have those moments.
Yeah.
You're going to have those moments. I remember just getting absolutely flattened on my back. I could throw in an excuse. I tripped on the center. I was playing guard at the time. I tripped on the center and ended up on my back. I don't even remember who it was, but I just remember oh my God, just the most embarrassing moment of my life on national TV, and I'm laying here on my back. So we all have been there. All right, so we're going to jump back in. You've had a really good career at Duke, and now you're in a position where you feel like, hey, man, I could still live out this dream that I've been chasing. What was the mindset as you started to get closer to that time to start to really show the NFL what your talents were?
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I needed to do was learn how to use my hands. I still didn't it was after my sophomore year. I had learned a lot of good stuff in my sophomore year, but I had a coach come to me. So I got a defensive coordinator my junior year, Ted Roof. He came from Georgia Tech, and he said, "Look, Ryan, I think you're a good player. If you don't learn to use your hands, you're not going to make any money in this sport." And so that was a huge transformation for me, going from outside linebacker to inside linebacker and learning how to use my hands. So that became a primary focus for at least my junior year. And then beyond that, it was like my testing numbers.
Yeah.
I had herniated my disc, a disc in my back as a freshman, excuse me. And as a result, I couldn't stride properly. So my testing, my 40 times were like in the 4.9s, and that wasn't going to get it cut. Yeah. And so I was really worried about that. So I did a lot of therapy and tried to get it without surgery. I tried to get my back better. It got to the point where I was adequate, right? But I still could never get full speed again until after I had surgery. But that was after the combine. So at the combine, I ran a 4.74 or something like that, which that year was the slowest of all linebackers that year. It was a fast year. And, that was embarrassing too. And that may have had an effect. I wasn't drafted. I went to the Cowboys as a free agent. But when I left college, I was the second all-time leading tackler in NCAA history. So I thought my production alone would have gotten me drafted. But I tell you, the 40 times is important, you know, and also, playing for Duke, it probably doesn't help a lot. But
Duke is in the ACC, not the SEC.
ACC.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, it's okay.
Just checking.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I would love to say that we still have basketball, but we don't. So
it's 1 year.
Yeah, at least not this past year.
Yeah.
So I wasn't drafted, and that was. I'm sure draft day is miserable for everybody that isn't picked first. You know what I mean? But for me, I didn't really start paying close attention until fourth round or so. I was hoping for fourth, but I was thinking fifth, sixth. But by the time the sixth came and I saw guys going off the board that, I'm better than him. And it was miserable. It was so miserable. But around the fifth round, I started getting calls from teams. Hey, listen, if you don't get drafted, we want you to sign a free agent deal with us. So I already had a contingent contract in place with Dallas, halfway through the fifth round, and that really came down to a couple things. Well, if I'm being honest, it came down a little bit to roster, but it mostly came down to the fact that they were going to pay me more, which in the big grand scheme of things is nothing, right? We're talking free agent, undrafted free agent money. The lowest offer I got was $2,500. The Cowboys offered $20,000. More than anything, it was an indication of their interest. I thought, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I ended up going, and I got there, did rookie camp. They sent us back for 2 weeks before we had to come back for off-season conditioning, and I blew my disc out completely. I drove 20 hours back to Dallas from
by the way,
Duke.
That's no fun.
No.
You was L4, L5?
Yes.
I remember playing, I think it was Washington, and game 11, I thought I already had a couple of epiderms in my back from disc issues. And I remember passing off a stunt and I felt something spit out the left side of my back.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just like, whoa, what was that? But I really didn't know at the time because I was on Toradol and muscle relaxers.
Yep.
So, and then all of a sudden I go in and get an MRI, and sure enough, a huge piece of fragment broke off in my back. And I played 2 more games after that before I even got an MRI, which was, just being a complete idiot when it came to playing through injuries. And so I don't wish that. I don't wish back pain on my worst enemy.
I know. It's crazy how much that affects everything.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I herniated my disc my freshman year, changing a car tire on New Year's Eve, right, without a jack. So we picked the car up. And played and had to manage that through college, and was always in pain, but had to change lifts and things like that. But when I went back after rookie camp to Duke to lift for 2 weeks before I came back, I blew it out completely. I was doing squats. Thank God we had guardrails because I crashed. That way it would have just landed right on me. And I was done. I couldn't walk without a weight belt as tight as I could get it. But I tried to fake it. I went back to Dallas. I drove 20 hours to Dallas with this. Oh man,
just excruciating
the
pain.
worst.
Sitting,
it was the worst.
Dude, I don't know how you did that.
And because I had to. Right? It was like one of those things. I couldn't do it now. I was just a much tougher guy back then, But I got there and I tried to fake my way through it, but there's no faking your way through that. Like couldn't walk hardly, right? So got an MRI. Turns out they're like, you need surgery because I got hurt away from there.
They wouldn't pay for it.
Nope, and they just cut me.
Yeah.
And I thought my life was over. And I went back and I had surgery. And 6 weeks later, I got a call. Well, I'll say this: Bill Parcells called me into his office right after they decided I needed surgery, and he said, "I love Bill." So he goes, "Ryan, come in here, sit down." He goes, "Now shut up, don't say anything." I didn't even open my mouth, right? Don't say anything. I know what you're going to ask me, right? You're going to ask me, what should you do? And he goes, right? And I was like, yeah. He goes, just shut up. And I go, okay. And he goes, listen, if you were my son, I'd tell you to go have the surgery. Okay. He goes, I like you. I'll bring you back if you feel like you're ready to go. I said, okay. So I left. I went and had surgery. 6 weeks later, I call him. He's not there. Okay. Because he vacations in Jupiter, Florida right before the beginning of the season. Right. So I can't get a hold of him. So that was the longest 2 weeks of my life. I was calling every day, just calling like, oh no, I'm never going to play. So eventually he calls me back. Same thing. He goes, Ryan? I go, yes, sir. He goes, all right, listen, shut up. He goes, I'm going to bring you back. All right. He's like, I'll put you on the practice squad, yada, yada. So sure enough, he flew me out. I was 4 days late to camp. I showed up. Back pain was still tremendous, right? Yeah. But I was able to actually like do stuff. Ooh. And so I just, manage that pain and whatever. And true to his word, he put me on the practice squad. The Giants tried to pull me off the practice squad in week 4 or 5. And the Cowboys had to force their hand, move me up. Yeah. So I spent the rest of that season on the active roster, but never dressed out until the very end of the season.
Yeah. So just so people know, if you're on a practice squad and another team wants you, the only way a team can protect you is to move you up to the active roster. Right. And so once you get on the active roster, now you're like, all right, I'm here now.
Yeah, man.
I'm here now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at least financially, I felt that was there because, you
get a pay raise.
It's like triple. So, and it was funny because I was signing for my house. I bought a house. I don't know why I bought a house on practice squad. That was probably the dumbest thing I could have done, right? Like I'm on practice squad. Why would I buy a house?
It's Dallas though.
Yeah, it was pretty cheap.
Cost at the time too.
It was pretty cheap. I think my first house was $170,000.
Yeah. So.
And it was the day that we were moving in that I got the call from the Giants. And I was like, yes. I'm like, first of all, I was like, this is going to be awful. Like I'm going to have to sell the house. Right. But when I realized like, they're probably going to bump me up, and they did, I was like, yes. Yeah. So, and I remember telling my wife too, at that point, hey, listen, we've budgeted $5,000 a month. Just because I got a pay raise doesn't mean we should like increase that. Yeah, that lasted like a week. And that trend continued for the next 10 years.
You see those big checks coming in, you're like, oh yeah, all right, I got another one coming in another week.
Yeah, I'm gonna get Kerrygold butter instead of this other kind. Yeah.
All right, so now you find your way through the league as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah.
You are, you have an injury, now you're panicking that is this thing really going to work out? Will I ever capture this dream? And it seems like you finally captured a dream where you go from working your way through being a special team guy to being a starting linebacker in the NFL, man. How was that? What was that feeling like?
Look, if I'm being honest, there was never a point while I was in the NFL where I'm like, okay, I made it. You know what I mean? It's so that the business is so fickle. Our bodies are so unpredictable. Right. Like I'm one injury away from that it being over. That was kind of the way I always thought about it. And so in Dallas, I did make a name for myself, especially on special teams. Like that was I learned that my willingness to crash into a wall of people, like, put me on a level of put me in a group of people that were pretty rare, which was wedge busters, right? You were in a group of like, hey, don't mess with these guys because their elevator doesn't make it all the way to the top. Yeah. So and look, again, the traits that we acquire in the pursuit of one thing don't always serve us well later in life. Yeah. And so that was one thing that was hard to overcome. But that mentality of like, I will kill you, like. if I have to kill myself, that's fine, but I'm going to do what I have to do here. Cause that was the only way I was going to make this team.
Yeah.
Right. Like I wasn't starting. I wasn't even playing much on defense. It was like, if I'm going to make this team, I have to be willing to do something that nobody else will do.
I can tell you right now, I wasn't willing to go and take that from
And
you.
luckily you didn't have to. Like,
They tried, but I was like, I'm just gonna go ahead and play dumb.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about this before, but like, thank God Darrell Reed had changed the entire like game, right? Because he was literally ending guys' career on a weekly basis by being a wedge buster. I mean, 290-pound defensive tackle. If you guys haven't seen the hit, look it up. Just type in Darrell Reed hit, and you'll see he has the biggest. John Madden says it's the hardest hit he's ever seen. It was on Chris. What was the guy's name? Now I can't think of it. He was a running back for the Titans, and Darrell Reed, 290-pound defensive tackle, is running down on kickoff for the Colts and just destroys him. I mean, the kid bounces the kid's head off the ground. Anyway, the point is that they don't have that anymore, right? There are no more wedge busters, thank God. I will say that, like, if it hadn't been for that, I might not have been an NFL player, right? Like, that gave me time to develop as a linebacker to be able to become a starter eventually. So, yeah. So it was after my third year with the Cowboys. I was a free agent because I wasn't drafted, so I was basically unrestricted. And got into a bidding war between Philly and Tennessee, and that worked out to my advantage. And I came to Tennessee and started that first year in Tennessee, and it was amazing. It was there were moments, right, where they say at your wedding, take time to like take it all in and like really, and there were moments of that for me that year, but they were pretty short lived because I was always worried about the next thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you go on and you have a really good career, and then you start to figure out, like, all right, this career is going to end at some point. At what moment in your career that started to happen for you? Was there injuries? Was there things that brought that to a head quicker for you? Yeah,
for sure. So 2009 is when the concussion thing became a real problem in the NFL, right? There were a few suicides of fairly high profile guys. There was Dave Duerson, and there was Mike Webster, right? And then eventually it was Junior Seau, and there was a couple others, and everyone was like, what's going on here? Like, what is happening? And it had somehow slipped everyone's like awareness that smashing into people with your head is like not good for you. Yeah. And this really shone a bright light on it. And so as a wedge buster, I knocked myself out a number of times. Turns out, like, so I don't know how you diagnose concussion exactly, but I was knocked unconscious somewhere between 30 and 40 times. Wow. Yeah. And so at the end of the 2009 season, when all this information started becoming available through the NFL, that, hey, like, this causes problems later in life, right? Namely CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is just a fancy way of saying punch drunk, right? Like, boxers have had to deal with that for years. Like, but they called it punch drunk, right? Now we have a name for it, CTE. So my wife and I had a tough conversation. After the 2009 season, we decided, like, it would be best if I probably just stopped playing and maybe went back to school and pursued another career. So that's what I did. I stopped after the 2009 season, and then I floundered around for a bit trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I coached for a season at Pace University in New York, and then I went back to school. I went back and got my MBA. I went back to Duke, got my MBA, and thought I would join the business world at that point.
Yeah, man, concussions, man, that's scary.
Yeah.
Scary. Yeah. I would say in my entire career, I don't know if I remember or not, but I don't think I've been unconscious. And I know I've seen black spots and it was like, whew, all right, I got to gather myself. Yeah. But I don't think, especially as a pulling guard and a center who's pulling, you come around, linebacker coming downhill, you run up against guys like Sean Merriman. Yeah. I remember the first time I pulled around and had to block him, I was like, at 275 pounds coming downhill at you, and so, I can't say that I've been unconscious, right. But I'm thankful that I didn't go through that process because I'm sure that's probably scary. I mean, think about that 30 times.
Yeah, scary the first time.
30 times?
Yeah, between 30 and 40. I lost count.
I mean.
But look, there was a stretch of 8 games when I was with the Cowboys where I was unconscious once every game. But that went all the way back to high school.
So, I mean, what's your thoughts on it around, now we got a lot more information and you see a guy like Tua and then you look at, what you've had to endure in your transition around these concussions, what are your thoughts around that for him? Like, are you a guy to say, hey man, just, walk away, or are you a guy to say, hey man, I've made it through it. And, there are some challenges on the other side of it, but, so, I mean, what is your opinion?
So my ultimate answer to this is to each his own.
Yeah.
I personally, people say like, if you had known then what you know now about concussions, would you still have played it? I say, yeah, I would have, because that was my dream. That's what I always wanted to do. And you can't, you take a warrior off a battlefield. Who is he? Right. So in Tua's case, I have a hard time watching it. Yeah. It's always hard to watch a guy on the field whose arm like gets stuck or something like that. Cause I know that feeling. Yeah. And it's very scary for me. Now I will say this, kids, high school players who have had 3-4 concussions, man, I want them to stop. Yeah. I really do. Again, it's up to the parents and doctors and the kid and everything like that, to each his own. But for a guy like Tua, who spent his whole life doing this, who loves it, I think he's old enough. I mean, he's a man and he can make those decisions. I would be happy to see him stop. I would also be happy to know that he knows the risks and wants to do it anyway. Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, we're starting to wind down here, but I wanted to touch on a little bit of your transition out of the league and figuring out, what is that next thing? You went back to business school, got your master's in business, you go in the corporate world for a while, but there's something that kept dragging you back to a place where you wanted to teach and you wanted to coach. And, so what does that transition has looked like for you? And why is that has been a safe haven for you as you kind of developed and cultivated this skill set, in the coaching ranks? Yeah.
So while I was in business school, I realized pretty quickly that the corporate world didn't really interest me. There was a lot of talk about, Wall Street and things that we could do. There was the financial side and there was the management side, and like it all sounded like I didn't understand exactly what was the purpose, right? And it became sort of clear to me after some time, or at least in my own mind, that what people were trying to do was make money. Yeah. And that wasn't my interest. I wanted to do something that I felt had purpose and meaning and would make a difference. Now, that has changed some over time, because I do realize there's an importance to money for a lot of people, especially when they have families, and it gives you the ability to do things, right, that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But at the time, I was still very much an idealist, I think. And I wanted to do something good. I wanted to do something helpful. I wanted to change people's lives. And on a like ground level basis, right? Like I wanted to coach, I wanted to teach. So I remember I was interviewing with a couple of companies for positions in 2013, shortly after I graduated. And I got a call from Renee Stewart, who was the head coach. He'd just become the head coach of Whites Creek High School in Nashville. Mm-hmm. And he asked me if I wanted to coach. And I said, absolutely not. Not there, and not, and he said, all right, well, can you help me find someone? So I said, yeah, I'll look around for you. Well, I started thinking about it, and I was like, why am I interviewing for jobs? Why am I asking somebody to give me work? Right. I've got somebody else asking me to work and needing me. And so I made the decision that, I will go be his defensive coordinator at Whites Creek High School in 2013. And the day after I decided I was going to do that, I got calls from 3 of the companies that I was in. So I was interviewing for a scouting position with the Titans. I was interviewing for a surgical equipment sales job with a couple of Smith and Nephew and Stryker. And I got calls back from all 3 of them on the same day. And they were all like, hey, we want you to come back in for a final, or, hey, we got good news, or, hey, and I had to say, hey guys, sorry, I accepted another position. And universally, all 3 of them laughed at me when I said, Yeah, I'm going to be a high school football coach. Lake Dawson, who was the general manager at the time, he laughed, and then he's a wonderful guy. So he laughed. He knew I had ambitions of being a general manager because when I played for the Titans, we used to talk about it all the time. Right. So he kind of laughed when I said high school football, and then he goes, "Wait, you're serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Man, I wish you the best of luck. You're a better man than I am." And so that started my high school coaching career. And so I coached there for a season. I spent 3 years at Ravenwood. I spent a year at Lipscomb. And I've been in the mix, right? I've been in 7-on-7 leagues and flag football. Again, I coached my daughter all through Little League, and then she played a year in high school also before she got cancer. She's all better now. But we're a football family. That's what we've been doing. Now, while I was coaching at Ravenwood, I was asked to teach. And so I thought, man, what is coaching? It's teaching. Right? Yeah. And then I found a passion for teaching. So I taught physics and astronomy and personal finance at Ravenwood for a few years. And then I moved on and did a couple other things, but I keep coming back. I keep coming back to football. And really it led me to develop my own system of teaching football. I have a course that teaches football knowledge, from a very elementary level up to what I would consider fairly sophisticated, and developed a system around learning film study and stuff. And I continue to try to find ways. And that's how you and I have gotten to this point, is because I realized you were doing something too with that, that would further the game, right? That would further the improvements that are available to players to make. So that's why I became interested and wanted to talk to you about Team Q and Player Q. And I just think that what we have the opportunity to do is there's a big gap in, and so I love that. And that's where we are today. I still coach. I do a lot of private coaching for a couple college guys, a guy that plays for the Chargers, and then high school kids all the way down to 10 years old. And I'm just always trying to find new ways, better ways to teach kids and like improve their understanding and love for the game.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you can look back over your time and starting to figure out, what is those things outside of the physical attributes? What's my IQ of football? What's my EQ of who I am? What is some of the one or two of the important pieces that you want to instill in this generation of athlete that, they up against the wall with a lot of different things. When you talk about social media, you talk about NIL, transfer portal, all these things that can be a distraction. What are some of the important pieces that you would like to instill in them to have a focus that, either we didn't have or something that you wish you would have focused on earlier?
So two things, and to me they go together. One is knowledge, information, understanding how all the pieces work, what the pieces are, like truly understanding the game. And then the next step in that, again, to me, it's an evolution, right? We got the physical, we got the informational, and then we have this like psychological or like spiritual even. Mm-hmm. And the next step to that is mastery of our own minds, our own thoughts, right, our own spirit. There's so much power like in things that we can't see that we have in us, right? Mm-hmm. Our brains are amazing machines, right? But there's more than that. Like our minds separate from our brain, right? Like our spirit and our soul and all of that. Once we have the ability to like harness that power and command that power and even control that power. Now all of a sudden we're able to get into states of mind, states of spirit that are conducive to whatever we want to do. Right. Whether that's meditating to calm down or to have incredible insights or whatever, or it's hyping yourself up to get ready for something that requires that. To be able to have mastery over your mind is like, to me, that's the superpower that we all need next. That's the next in the evolution.
Man, this has been fantastic, and love what you stand for and the work ethic that you've shown to get yourself where you are, the drive. I think it's very important for people to when you have a dream, you have a goal, is to set your sights on it and really and really lean into it and get there, and then continue to find ways that the things that you need to be self-aware of. How does Ryan navigate this space? If the odds are stacked against me, how do I still find a pathway there? And so it's been fantastic to hear your story around that. My last question for you, though, is, and you look back again, and you start thinking about, these intangibles that are dear to us. What are those one or two intangibles that really stick out to you that's made you who you are today, that keeps you going?
So I think that there's two. It's curiosity, right? I have an insatiable hunger for knowing things. It drives a lot of people crazy. Honestly, it borders on obsession. I think we've talked about this, but I have an Audible account, right? Audible is audio books that you buy, you can listen to. I have an Audible account that I've spent something like $25,000 on. Like I have 1,170 titles, and most of them are nonfiction, right? They're mostly informational things. It's a lot of psychology, a lot of physics, some sports, but it's almost all with the idea of, how do I make myself better? How do I have a better understanding of myself? How do I harness the power of a mind that I'm only using 10% of, right? Like, how do I do that? And then if you couple that with work ethic, now you've got a combination that actually moves things, right? So I think it's work ethic and curiosity.
Yeah. Curiosity, work ethic. Ryan, you've been an amazing guest, and I really enjoyed your story. Look forward to continuing to knowing more about you and what you're doing and the work that you're, so passionate about doing, and find ways that we can link up to continue to spread the word on how do we look beyond just our physical attributes and focus on the things that really set us apart in whatever environment we go, because the skill sets that we as athletes have is ones that are really important for thriving in the real world outside of sports. And so we want athletes to really know that their skill set is transferable, and they don't have to have their identity completely wrapped up in sports.
Absolutely.
And again, thinking long-term and not short-term.
Absolutely.
So Ryan, again, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
It's been fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.